Right now, as you watch this, two of the most powerful military forces on Earth are eyeballing each other across the Arabian Sea. The USS Abraham Lincoln, one of the largest warships ever built, is positioned in the waters off Iran's coast. A second carrier strike group has just been ordered to join it. B-2 stealth bombers capable of carrying the world's most powerful bunker-buster bombs are on standby. American fighter jets are flying readiness drills across 20 nations in the Middle East, and two anonymous U.S. officials told Reuters just this week that the American military is now preparing for the possibility of sustained weeks-long operations against Iran if President Donald Trump gives the order. This is not a drill. This is not political theater. This is the most dangerous moment in U.S.-Iran relations in decades, and understanding how we got here requires going back to a single night 8 months ago that changed everything. On the night of June 22, 2025, at precisely the moment most of the world was asleep, 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers crossed into Iranian airspace. These are the most advanced aircraft on Earth, radar-absorbing, near-invisible to conventional detection systems, flying at altitudes and on flight paths designed to defeat Iran's entire air defense network. But what made that night even more extraordinary was what happened before the bombs dropped. U.S. Cyber Command, operating on intelligence from the National Security Agency, executed a digital attack that silently disabled the Iranian air defense systems connected to the nuclear sites at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. Iranian radar operators stared at screens that told them nothing was coming while American stealth bombers were already overhead. Then came the bombs. 12 massive ordnance penetrators, each one weighing 30,000 pounds and carrying 5,300 pounds of explosives, were dropped on Fordo, the underground enrichment facility built deep inside a mountain near the city of Qom. These are the most powerful conventional bombs ever used in combat, specifically designed to penetrate 60 meters of earth and reinforce concrete before detonating. The Natanz nuclear facility and the Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center were hit simultaneously with additional bunker busters and Tomahawk cruise missiles fired from an American submarine. The entire operation, which involved 4,000 military personnel across multiple branches and platforms, was completed in less than 30 minutes. The mission was called Operation Midnight Hammer, and when it was over, Trump appeared before cameras and declared that Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities had been, in his words, completely and totally obliterated. To understand why the United States took that extraordinary step, you have to understand what Iran had been doing in the months leading up to it. After the United States withdrew from the 2015 nuclear deal in 2018, Iran systematically dismantled every restriction the agreement had placed on its nuclear program. It replaced slower first-generation centrifuges with advanced models capable of enriching uranium at dramatically faster rates. By May 2025, the International Atomic Energy Agency reported that Iran had stockpiled over 408 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, nearly 50% more than just 3 months earlier. That number matters for a specific and terrifying reason. Weapons-grade uranium is enriched to 90%. Getting from 60% to 90% is, in terms of the technical work required, a relatively small final step. The IAEA, which exists specifically to monitor these things, concluded that Iran's stockpile was sufficient for multiple nuclear weapons if enriched further. Iran was, in the IAEA's clinical language, the only country in the world without a nuclear weapons program enriching uranium to near weapons-grade levels. And by late 2024, analysts at the Arms Control Association calculated that Iran could produce enough weapons-grade uranium for 5 to 6 bombs in less than 2 weeks. There was something else. In early 2025, U.S. intelligence reported that a covert team of Iranian scientists was working on what officials described as a faster, cruder approach to constructing an actual weapon. Faster and cruder meant something specific in this context. It meant a gun-type fission device, a simpler nuclear weapon design that does not require the precision engineering of the more sophisticated implosion-style bombs. Gun-type weapons cannot be miniaturized for missile delivery, but they can be built more quickly and with less advanced manufacturing capability. The intelligence suggested Iran was exploring a pathway to a nuclear device that could be operational in months rather than years, even if it would be a weapon deliverable only by truck or ship, rather than a ballistic missile. When Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited Washington in February 2025 and presented Trump with a detailed slide deck showing the trajectory of Iran's enrichment program, the message was unambiguous. The window for preventing a nuclear Iran was closing, and it was closing fast. Trump gave diplomacy 60 days. In that 60-day window, American and Iranian negotiators spoke. Iran offered to reduce enrichment to 3.67%, the level permitted under the original 2015 deal. The United States demanded zero enrichment. The talks went nowhere. And then, on June 12, 2025, the IAEA voted to censure Iran for non-compliance with its nuclear obligations for the first time in 20 years. Iran's response was to announce it would open a new uranium enrichment facility at an undisclosed location and install additional advanced centrifuges. The following day, Israel launched the Iran-Israel war with coordinated strikes across Iranian nuclear and military facilities. The United States joined 9 days later with Operation Midnight Hammer. A ceasefire was announced on June 24th. The 12-day war was over. But as anyone paying attention could have predicted, it was not the end of the story. By October 2025, according to reporting cited by Wikipedia's detailed account of the crisis, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei had privately authorized the development of miniaturized nuclear warheads for ballistic missiles. Iran acknowledged in November that the June strikes had halted all uranium enrichment across the country. Satellite imagery, however, began showing reconstruction activity at the damaged sites almost immediately after the ceasefire. By early 2026, the Council on Foreign Relations was reporting directly that Iran was already rebuilding the sites that had been struck, and that Iran had announced concrete steps to restore its nuclear program. A July 2025 Pentagon assessment had concluded that the strikes set Iran's nuclear program back approximately 2 years. 2 years is not the same as permanently dismantled. 2 years is a deadline. And then, in December 2025, something happened inside Iran that changed the entire calculation again. Nationwide protests erupted against the Islamic Republic, triggered by economic collapse, water shortages, and decades of accumulated grievance against a government that had spent its people's money on nuclear programs, proxy armies, and ballistic missiles, while ordinary Iranians faced 40% unemployment and a currency that had lost 90% of its value over the previous decade. The regime's response was brutal. Thousands of protesters were killed in the streets. The images circulated globally. Trump publicly told Iranian protesters to keep protesting, and that, in his words, help is on the way. European leaders, including German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, began saying publicly that the Iranian leadership was in its final days and weeks. The chief of the General Staff of the Israeli Defense Forces estimated that war would begin within either 2 weeks or 2 months. It was against this backdrop that the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group departed its home port in San Diego in November 2025, spent weeks operating in the South China Sea, and then abruptly pivoted westward toward the Arabian Sea in late January 2026. The U.S. Central Command confirmed the deployment, characterizing it as intended to promote regional security and stability. Nobody was fooled. On January 31, 2026, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced it was conducting 2-day live-fire naval exercises in the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which approximately 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes every single day. American ships were already in the region. The U.S. military issued an immediate warning, stating it would not tolerate unsafe IRGC actions near U.S. military vessels. 3 days later, on February 3rd, 6 IRGC Navy gunboats attempted to stop and board an American tanker in the strait. The tanker ignored their demands and continued under the escort of the USS McFall destroyer. On the same day, an American F-35 fighter jet shot down an Iranian Shahed drone that was approaching the Abraham Lincoln. 2 days after that, on February 5th, Iran seized 2 foreign oil tankers near Farsi Island in the Persian Gulf, claiming they were involved in fuel smuggling. The temperature was rising by the day. The diplomatic track running in parallel with all of this military posturing tells a story of its own. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner flew to Oman and then Istanbul for talks with Iranian representatives. The February 6th meeting was described by Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi as a very good start. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was more cautious, saying that while Trump's preference was to reach a deal, that was, in his word, very hard to do. The core problem is structural and appears nearly irresolvable on paper. The United States is demanding that Iran permanently halt all uranium enrichment, impose significant constraints on its ballistic missile program, and end all support for proxy groups including the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and what remains of Hamas in Gaza. Iran's absolute red line, stated repeatedly and at the highest levels including by Supreme Leader Khamenei himself, is that uranium enrichment is non-negotiable. Khamenei called the talks nonsense and said Iran was not waiting for anyone's permission on enrichment. Meanwhile, one Iranian official told Reuters that Iran might be willing to accept zero enrichment under a consortium arrangement and hand over its stockpile of highly enriched uranium to a third party. The gap between these positions is enormous. But the fact that any conversation is happening at all is significant, because both sides understand precisely what the alternative is. The alternative, according to what 2 anonymous U.S. officials told Reuters this week, is weeks-long sustained operations against Iran that would extend well beyond nuclear sites to include Iranian state institutions and security facilities. The officials said the planning envisions a back-and-forth exchange of strikes, meaning the U.S. military is preparing not for a single night's operation like Midnight Hammer, but for a sustained campaign with retaliatory exchanges. That is a dramatically different kind of conflict from anything the United States has conducted against Iran previously. And the risks are proportionately larger. Iran's military capability, while degraded by the June 2025 strikes, is not insignificant. Its ballistic missile arsenal remains extensive. Its ability to close the Strait of Hormuz, even temporarily, would trigger an immediate global energy crisis. An oil price spike of the kind that would result from a major Hormuz disruption could tip already fragile global economies into recession. Saudi Arabia has publicly called for a peaceful diplomatic resolution. The UAE has stated it will not allow military operations from its territory or airspace. Turkey has opposed American military action and offered to mediate. Iraq has warned that escalation would threaten regional stability. Even America's regional partners are not unified behind military action. And yet the military preparations continue. A second aircraft carrier strike group has been ordered to deploy to the Middle East. The Pentagon is deploying additional fighter planes, destroyers, and missile defense assets. U.S. Air Force's Central Command announced multi-day readiness drills across its entire area of responsibility. Retired General Jack Keane, describing the situation on Fox News, called the Trump administration's maximum pressure approach effective while suggesting large-scale military action remained unlikely in the short term. The U.S. Treasury is simultaneously applying economic pressure, imposing fresh sanctions targeting Iranian political figures, and tracking what Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent described as senior Iranian leaders moving tens of millions of dollars out of the country, which he said was evidence the regime was abandoning ship. What makes this moment so genuinely difficult to read is that both the military escalation and the diplomatic engagement are simultaneously real. This is not a situation where one of those things is theater and the other is the actual policy. Trump deployed military force against Iran in June 2025 and then announced a ceasefire the next day. He is now building up forces again while sending envoys to talk. He told troops that regime change might be beneficial while simultaneously authorizing diplomacy. The White House spokeswoman stated simply that Trump has all options on the table. That phrase, all options on the table, is the oldest and most reliable piece of diplomatic language in American foreign policy, and it means exactly what it says. Everything is possible. Nothing is decided. At the center of all of this is a man in Tehran who has spent decades building a nuclear program he describes as peaceful, who has watched his country get bombed once already, whose air defenses were disabled by American cyber weapons before he even knew the planes were overhead, whose proxy network has been systematically degraded over the past 2 years, whose economy is collapsing, whose population is in open revolt, and who is simultaneously being offered a diplomatic lifeline and staring down 2 American carrier strike groups. Khamenei is 85 years old. He has been supreme leader since 1989. He has outlasted 11 American presidents. And according to the intelligence community's own assessment, he remains the final decision maker on any Iranian nuclear choice. The question hanging over the Arabian Sea right now is not whether the United States is capable of sustained military operations against Iran. It clearly is, as Operation Midnight Hammer demonstrated. The question is whether the 2 sides can find an arrangement that gives each of them enough of what they need to pull back from the edge. Iran needs sanctions relief and economic oxygen to prevent its government from collapsing under the weight of popular revolt. The United States needs verifiable assurances that Iran will not cross the nuclear threshold. Whether those 2 needs can be reconciled in a negotiating room in Oman or Geneva with the USS Abraham Lincoln visible on the horizon as context is the question that may determine the course of the Middle East for a generation. What we know with certainty, as of today, February 15, 2026, is this. 2 of the world's most powerful navies are operating in close proximity in one of the world's most strategically critical waterways. A military is actively planning for weeks-long operations. A nuclear program that was bombed 8 months ago is being rebuilt. A government is massacring its own people in the streets. Diplomats are talking in hotel rooms in Oman. And the world is watching. Because what happens next, in the waters between the Arabian Peninsula and the Iranian coast, will send ripples through energy markets, through regional security, through the global nuclear non-proliferation order, and through the lives of millions of people who had no say in any of it, on either side. This is not the beginning of the story, but it may be the most dangerous chapter yet.